So I'm going to go ahead and get started. And you'll notice that we now are recording. So I hope that is all okay with you. This recording will be up on the college's YouTube channel afterwards. So in case you want to share this talk with friends, please direct them that way. So good afternoon and welcome. I am Shannon Egan, director of the Schmucker Art Gallery. And while I wish we could all be in the gallery this afternoon, celebrating the opening of the Juried Student Exhibition and Julie Wills's installation Split Void, I am thrilled to see all your names in the boxes pop up on my screen today. So today, as you know, Julie Wills will be talking about her work that is on display at Schmucker Art Gallery, and she'll discuss how it relates to her larger artistic process and some of her other bodies of work. And then she will announce the award winners from the Juried Student Exhibition and show a few of the installation shots. So I'll be moderating the question and answer session at the end of the presentation. So please feel free to type any questions or comments into the chat box if you don't want to be recorded, or you are welcome to also raise your hand if you want to be unmuted and ask your question in person. So before I introduce Julie and hand the screen over to her, I just want to extend huge congratulations to all of our participating student artists, and just so much gratitude to the studio art professors. It's been extraordinary to see how well our faculty have taught, how much the students have made, as well as everyone's commitment to just sort of making really good, like conceptually rigorous and well executed works during and in spite of the pandemic. Because we could not mount last year's Juried Student Exhibition and we had to postpone Julie's show because of the campus shutdown, because of the onset of COVID, we've opened up this year's entries to include works made since our last Juried exhibition in 2019. So the result has been fantastic. We've been able to see some of the works that were made for last year's capstone show, as well as remarkable prints, drawings, paintings, sculptures, and ceramics made both in person and remotely during this very challenging year. Also new to 2021 is a video presentation of about 90 works that were submitted digitally. And so that's on a large wall projected in the back of the gallery. So it's been wonderful to see about 3 times as many works as we're usually able to hang in the gallery, and just to have this big, fantastic, inclusive exhibition. So if you are a student, staff, or faculty on campus, I encourage you to visit the gallery. Students who are around are invited to attend an after hours event on April 9th, where you can sign up for a time slot in the evening between 7 and 10, just to hang out, to vote for a Students of Choice Award, to get some treats on your way out to go, and to see friends and to see some amazing art, including Julie's installation. You can find the link on our Instagram page, and we'll also be posting on social media a way for remote students to also experience and vote for their favorite works. So please stay tuned. And now I want to turn my thanks to Julie. Julie Wills is an interdisciplinary artist working in the expanded field of sculpture, including installation, collage, performance, video, and architectural interventions. Wills is an assistant professor of studio art at Washington College in Chestertown, Maryland. And her recent solo exhibitions have been presented at VisArts in Rockville, Maryland, C for Courtside in Knoxville, Tennessee, the Arlington Arts Center, Hillyer Art Center in Washington, D.C., and Whittier College in Los Angeles. She is a 2019 recipient of an Individual Artist Award from the Maryland State Arts Council. And she has been awarded recent artist residencies at, I'm not going to pronounce this right, Riag in Ireland, Artelis in Finland, and a few other residencies. Her works are included in the White Columns Artist Registry in New York and the ICA Baltimore's Flat Files program. And in addition to her individual studio practice, Wills is one of 4 artist members of the Bridge Club, an interdisciplinary performance art collaborative that's been active since 2014. And so now, please join me in giving a virtual hand clap and a warm welcome to Julie.
Thank you for all those virtual hand claps, and thank you, Shannon, very much. My thanks to all of you for being here today in what I know has been a whole lot of Zoom for everybody. We've all had our fill, so I'm extra grateful that you are here. I'm thrilled to see some of the names that I recognize from the student artists who submitted work, which is fantastic. And a handful of you that I met at Gettysburg, where you guys have been so warm to me. And I'm extra thrilled to also see some of my dear ones from my world. So wonderful to have everybody here in this strange Zoom universe. Let me jump in and share my screen, and we will get started. Let me see. Oops. All right, you guys all see on my screen okay there? I'm gonna minimize my window so that I can see what we're doing. Okay. I'm going to begin by moving fairly quickly through some images of the exhibit in the Schmucker Art Gallery. I know not everyone has likely made it over there yet, or you may be remote. So I'll just go pretty quickly through some images giving the lay of the land. And while I do so, I'm going to read the exhibit statement. So bear with me here as we bang through a bunch of images really quite quickly. I will circle back to these and talk about the individual works as well. So this exhibit, titled Split Void, is organized around a question. Can longing be divided in half and shared between 2 entities, or is it merely doubled? Can half the weight of desire be borne by another, thus lightening its load? Or by sharing, do we only magnify its effects? The context of Gettysburg College, in a place so significant to the US Civil War, has also shaped my thinking for this exhibit. In essence, a civil war is a body at war with itself, an acknowledged intimacy that cannot be severed without mutual suffering. Mid-heaven, the central work in this exhibit, references the northern and southern circumpolar stars, constellations which cannot be seen from the opposite magnetic pole. While the moon behaves as a long-distance beacon intermittently visible from any geographic point, 2 individuals at opposite poles will never see one another's overhead stars. I frequently draw imagery from celestial sources. The moon, stars, and cosmos recur throughout in varying forms. The distant reaches of an infinite cosmos strain to reach their other halves. Individual stars fall from the sky, disrupting the known order of the universe. Through this imagery, I explore constancy and mutability, current conditions, and hope for an unrealized but longed for future. So I'm going to talk about 3 aspects of my work and give a bit of context for how these have evolved to bring me to what you see here. So I'm going to talk about language or text, and I'll talk about materials, and I'll talk about imagery or subject matter. Particularly in the context of giving a talk at a college, I like to think about the sorts of artist talks that I liked to see when I was in school. And I loved going to hear artists speak about their work. I may be unusual in that regard, but I know there were other people that felt the same way. And my experience when I was an undergraduate was that I had come to college thinking there was Picasso and there was Van Gogh and there were graphic designers, and that was the art universe. So having artists come and talk about their work and see what a real possibility it was that there were people in my everyday midst who were combining ideas in ways that didn't lead to a direct and practical result was revolutionary to me. And oftentimes my experience when I was younger was also feeling like, I don't know how all this layered stuff came together. You know, it's the sort of proverbial, how'd you think of that question? So I think by talking about my interest in these sort of key areas in language and materials, and then in imagery, because it ties more specifically to the theme of this, you know, Gettysburg focused exhibit, will help me talk to that a little bit. So the work that you're looking at here is really the central organizing work of this exhibit, as I've got it up at Gettysburg now. And this is a new work that I created for this show. It's called Midheaven, which is an astrological term. It is a list across the top of the paper, and I might jump back and forth in images here a little bit. So you'll see over in this image on the left, running across the top edge of the paper, are the names of northern constellations. So we've got Camelopardalis, Capella, Auriga, Ursa Major, etc. And then this is the bottom edge of the paper, and we've got southern constellations running across it: Sagittarius, Sirius, Spica. They're solid lines when they're at their northern and southernmost points, so to speak, on the paper, and the individual letters start to fall apart as they travel toward that midline or central band. The motivating force for this work was thinking about elements in the sky as triangulators, as the moon as being this magical thing that we can look at up above us, and two people in faraway places can romantically look at it and know that they're looking at the same moon. But thinking instead about what happens if you're standing at opposite poles. So someone standing at the equator could theoretically see all of the constellations at once, but someone standing at the North Pole couldn't see any of the southern constellations, and vice versa. So that sort of sadness of never seeing one another's overhead stars sort of clusters along this central band in the middle of this work. I've extended the band out around the entire gallery. It becomes sort of a narrative device for some of the more Gettysburg specific work, which I'll talk about in a minute here. So I'll give you just a couple of detail images of this work to get a little better sense of what's happening. There's all sorts of materials layered in here. The text is vinyl lettering. The band around the perimeter is sandpaper. It's like a giant band of sandpaper that I actually purchased at the sandpaper outlet in Gettysburg, which was such a find for me. Tumbleweed, which had recurring themes in my work for a long time, tree branches, string, cord, sort of geometries suggested through their relationships and pairings. So I'll talk a little bit about the origin of this sort of falling letters text. And this segues me a little bit into thinking about materials. The image on the left here, this is a pairing that goes together. The one on the left is a letterpress print that I made the very first time I had the opportunity to create a work in letterpress. And if you're familiar with that process, it's the old school kind of printing where individual type letters are cast traditionally in lead. It's the way old newspapers were set or old books were set, where each individual letter has to be set into a plate that's then run through the press and printed. So it's labor intensive to set type. And when I approach a new material, I like to approach it by questioning what it does that is unique to it. And what I landed upon for letterpress was that there's a finite number of letters in the drawer. You're limited by how many characters you have access to before you have to start over. So I created this print that's repeating two phrases, sky blue sky, hole black hole, until I ran out of text in the drawer. And as you can see, let's see, it looks like I ran out of a K much more quickly than I did the final S was my last letter left. So that was thinking about these as individual letters falling off of the page, and that then transitioned into the stars falling from the sky. On the right is a piece of abraded sandpaper. I'll come back to talking about that in a second. The falling stars piece led to this work, which is just vinyl text that surrounds the entirety of this gallery project space called China Hutch Projects that I formerly ran in Chestertown, where I teach. This is the names of the 88 modern constellations rimming the perimeter of the room at the ceiling, and the letters slip off kind of fall off like they did on the page in the letterpress print as it comes toward that wainscot line in this sort of formal dining space. So the names of constellations remain intact at the top, but the individual letters fall apart. And in that regard, I'm thinking of the individual text characters as stars. Another work, again, thinking about the way that I am interested in language as a sort of formal device, the relationship between words and visual form. And also a work that, again, is thinking about the process that I'm using. So in this case, it's cyanotype, and its peculiar or unique property is that it's this rich blue. You know, cyanotype is a photographic process that is coating the piece of paper that's to be exposed in chemicals that are then set out into the sun. The chemical is rinsed off and it leaves it this really rich characteristic blue. So creating this work in cyanotype, I thought of the sky. You know, it is first and foremost blue. So this is a work titled 43 Words to Describe the Color of the Sky. It was a work I made when I was 43 years old, hence the number, and is a work about mutability and change. It's thinking about the changing nature of the sky, but more metaphorically, the sort of changing sort of passage of time that one encounters emotively or otherwise. This work, titled Dual Moons, Untitled Dual Moons, I guess I should say, I want to point out that where I'm interested in language here is in the materials list, which is something that I also play with quite a lot. So the way I've got it listed here and on my website is 2 collage prints on paper, distance variable. And it's the distance variable that I'm interested in, that, you know, they're 2 very simple and identical prints that don't have a lot going on until you're aware that what we're talking about is the space between them. And that's what holds my interest. I've shown this work in a couple of contexts. For this show at Gettysburg College, the text that I've paired it with extends. This is my central band that runs through the middle of midheaven. This text is an extension of that band, and it is the redacted names of constellations that are no longer recognized by modern astronomy, which just feels particularly tender and sad to me, that the stars are still there in the sky, but they're not needed in the form that they were before. There's a loneliness to it. And these existed in another installation that I had done that I tend to sort of cannibalize components of works for new works. That's one of the beauties of working in installation. And I brought these as an extension of that central band. And because we're playing with this sort of north and south, northern southern constellation, the orientation flips too, so that at this midpoint between the 2 moons, you've got upside down and right side up. So just another view of that. The next piece I want to talk about is materials. So some of what I choose materials for is their color or their shape or the mark making. I think of all of my works as both sculpture and as drawing. And actually I've got a bio that is I've got 2 versions of a bio that are identical. One says, I think of all my works as sculpture, and the other says, I think of all my works as drawings. And I get one or the other out depending on what it is that I'm applying for with it or what the context is. But the truth is that I think of all of my work as drawing and as sculpture. I think of it as arranging marks in space. So, you know, this is actually a 2D work. This is doesn't have much dimension to it. It sits flat on the wall, though it's a lot of collage elements attached to that paper surface. But I'm thinking about color relationships, and I'm thinking about mass and density and line and all of these things that we think about when we're drawing, or that we think about when we're arranging materials in space. The other thing that I'm paying attention to with materials, though, is their associative properties, or what we already know about a material as a viewer when we come to it, without even necessarily thinking about, we just sort of intuit with our bodies. So sandpaper, I think, is a really great way of illustrating this. We know that sandpaper is rough, that it's abrasive, that it will erode. All of these things are apparent to us whether we're thinking about them or not. And they subtly set a tone that feels interesting to me. Those sort of associative readings feel interesting to me. In the case of black silicon carbide sandpaper, it also beautifully mimics the cosmos when sanded through. So I've made a number of works that use sandpaper in this way. The vinyl locator flags are another thing that have made a lot of recurring appearances in my work, including the show that's up at Gettysburg College right now. Again, we know a lot just from looking at a locator flag. Something is buried there. It's calling our attention. They throw up caution. This work is titled Red Flags and Surrender, and it's playing linguistically, I guess, with the red flag as a warning and the white flag as surrender, and that sort of space between, I guess. And then the last piece of this I want to talk about is imagery. I already referred in the statement I read you at the beginning, as well as when I was talking about midheaven, to my interest in the cosmos, that this sort of space imagery, the cosmic, is something that I return to again and again in my work. These are a couple of drawings that are from a series made on black paper with peat ash. This is related to the sandpaper in sort of an inverse way. The residency that I did in Ireland that Shannon quite rightly didn't want to try to pronounce, it's pronounced Kilreelig, though I would have had no idea that that was the case before I went there. But I spent 2 weeks in this amazing stone cottage from pre-famine Ireland that sits on a hill overlooking the Atlantic. And I had a peat fire for my heat source, as the wind just sort of beat against this place. So I made these drawings with peat ash that became the stars. That's just an anecdote to add to those. That's less related to the cosmos, other than that they looked like the cosmos. But I'm attracted to this sort of cosmos imagery because space is something that both presents itself as being knowable and is so vast and unknown. And this sort of, scientific and irrational, astronomy and astrology, all of the boths there really hold a lot of interest for me in this sort of space stuff, the cosmos stuff. This is an installation titled Astronomy Explained. The title is taken from a textbook of the same title, and all of the text, the language that's in this work, was pulled from the chapter headings in this Astronomy Explained textbook. And I just thought it was the most delightful thing, this 1970s textbook that's like spelling it all out for us. And, I'm sure that so much of what we thought we knew about space in the 1970s is so far gone at this point. And there's still so much that we don't know that it feels just delightful to say Astronomy Explained. And that kind of energy about it is what really draws me to space as a metaphor more than maybe as a subject matter. My interest in Gettysburg is perhaps a little less immediately apparent. So I'll talk a little bit about that. Interestingly, I was already working with these Gettysburg photographs that I had taken when Shannon reached out to me to ask about doing this show. And it was just one of those sort of cosmic oddities, it's like, oh, I happen to be making Gettysburg work right now. And, actually did a little bit of an internal wrangling and external too, talking it through with Shannon about, well, do I want to show Gettysburg work at Gettysburg? Does that do something else? So I'll talk a little bit about the way that I've shifted that, because I think the context does pretty markedly change the way the work reads and what I'm interested in doing with it. This work is titled Gettysburg, and it's a little bit difficult to decipher the individual photographs under there, which is by intent, but there are 4 photographs that I took around the military park. So I think on the lower left, this is one of the southern monuments on that row. And these are trees. We'll come back to that in the Q&A. You guys can tell me where these things are if we need to know, but they've been sort of obliterated, right? Like they've been made illegible by the layering of other material over the top. And I made these works, this work in particular, to anchor a body of work in an exhibit that was titled Battlefields, where I was really thinking of these as a series of tactical maps for navigating or making sense of love and loss and heartbreak. This is another of the works from that exhibit. This one is called Heartbreak. It's quite large, it's 45 by 45 inches, and it is 600 place names of sites throughout the world and throughout time where some variety of battle has taken place. So you can see here that the very upper left corner of the work starts with Gettysburg, and the lower right, which I don't have on there, you can bump back through it, you can see it there. The first word is Gettysburg, the last word is heartbreak, and in between are 598 sites of heartbreak. And here what I was thinking about was, the ubiquity of strife, right? The civil war in Syria was happening and all of these other things in the news that were devastating. And thinking about how everyone who has ever fallen in love and had a child or, like broken up or all of these sort of very personal individual experiences has done so against a backdrop of atrocities happening somewhere on the planet. So some of these are more sort of political or environmental or, sort of catastrophes that are not necessarily hand-to-hand combat. Others are massacre sites or sites of more recent police brutalities. Yeah, we'll leave it at that for that part. This is another work that was from the same exhibit and that is also included in the Gettysburg show here. So I'll talk in a second about how I'm reframing my thinking of it, but it's a photograph that I took of what to me reads as iconic, because when I drive up to install the show, he's the first fellow that I see over there on the right. And I don't actually know who it is. And something about this is what interests me about Gettysburg as well, that I'm not interested in the specific military history, as I know very many people are, and like rightly so, but rather I'm interested in it as a sort of iconographic stand-in for battle or North and South or Gettysburg as a word is sort of a shorthand for a whole lot of other things. And these works I think of as trading in the same way. What interests me about this photograph is that this massive figure in the image is sort of perceptually reduced to a figurine. He feels like a little fellow that you could move around playing games. And when I presented this work the first time, let's see if I come back to the materials info, you see it says 2 digital photographs, locator flags, and mixed media. So the work I regard as being 2 identical photographs that have been treated somewhat differently. And when I first showed this work, this was the Battlefields exhibit in Tennessee, I had the 2 photographs directly across from one another on opposite walls, hung at the same height as if they were, sort of doing battle across the space. It is important to me that they're identical figures. It is the same photograph, and that feels interesting to me in the way that I have installed it at Gettysburg as well, which I realize that my photographic pairing here makes this a little bit difficult to read, but this is the corner of the gallery, and this is just a detail view showing this lower left figure. So whereas in the last image that I showed you, in the battlefields exhibits, I had them high up, kind of as if they were on the hill overlooking one another across a battlefield. Here I've got them located on opposite sides of this central meridian that I've got, bisecting the entirety of the gallery space. So this becomes, like the Mason-Dixon line in a sense. It becomes this sort of like north-south constellation band that's been extended further still. Their distances across the line are less equal, though the one on bottom has the surrender flag raised. The narrative is less clear. Let's see, I put this slide in here as a nice transition to lead into talking about the student work in a minute. But the last thing I wanted to point out was that I've got this band structured in such a fashion that at this end of the gallery, depending on where you start, if you walk in on this end of the gallery and you see Gettysburg first, the band extends around through midheaven, the central work, and back over to the moons on the other side, or the inverse if you start the other direction. So what interests me with this is that the narrative really shifts depending on the order of orientation that you pursue it in. So surrender, if we think about this guy with the white flag as being at one end of it, might be the beginning or might be the ending. Okay. So I was so nervous that I would not stay under my time that I think I actually shaved 5 minutes. So there we go. That was the quick and dirty version. And I can absolutely come back to any of these things in the Q&A session at the end of it. But I also know that most of you are probably most excited to see the works of your peers, the other student award winners. I want to say first that it was an absolute pleasure to get to jury this show. I know firsthand how difficult it is to keep making art during a pandemic. I got something really lovely by email when the pandemic first started about how making art was the most urgent thing that could be done right now. And I really took it to heart. And I know from talking to so many of my artist colleagues what a range of experiences it's been. For some people, it's been creatively fruitful because it's a disruption of time. For others, it's been a complete block, and there's no rhyme or reason to that. It's just sort of all of our psychic experiences of the world, how we approach it. So I want to absolutely commend and validate whatever experience of making art in the pandemic has been like for you, and congratulate everyone who did the heavy lifting of applying to an exhibit during this time. I mean, just getting it done, I recognize is a big process. So really want to commend everyone who submitted work. Jurying a show is never easy. There's always more deserving works than can possibly be accommodated. Selecting award winners is even more difficult, but I really enjoyed seeing all of these works and want to feature a couple of installation shots here for those of you who either are not part of the Gettysburg campus, so can't see it, or who are working remotely. Shannon's just done a beautiful install and the works look stunning. You can see the relationship there. There's my little work peeking through in the back in the midst of all of these good things. Choosing award winners. Again, not an easy task. That's always the tricky part. But what I was looking for the most part, was something that was unexpected or didn't reveal itself to me in its entirety immediately upon looking. So I'm going to start with a few, the honorable mention awards, which I think there are 5 of, and say a little bit about each one as we go through. Here's our first, Erica Eberts. What I love about this work is that I I know from looking that it's a still life of some variety, but I can't tell what the parts are. And that's not what matters to me. You know, I think it's really lovely that what I'm engaging with are these sort of areas that recede and step forward, and darks and lights, and the sort of delicate touch of this sort of fuzzy surface that covers everything. You know, the cloth and the books and everything sort of become this fuzzy softness that I think is just lovely. Another still life that, again, here, I really love the way some areas are receding and some areas are pushing forward, and that isn't a logical pattern. You know, that some areas that seem like they should be in the foreground recede, and vice versa. It feels like there's a lot of complexity to engage with in looking at this work. So beautifully done, Shannon. Ceramics is near and dear to my heart. I have a background in ceramics. And again here, just responded to this work because I couldn't quite identify the parts readily, not being able to tell quite whether I'm looking at the claw of a hammer or something that's familiar or something that's unknown. These combinations felt really interesting. This one I just found really striking compositionally, using such a vast expanse of white space. I found to be really elegant. And again here, you know, these sort of cube forms that are the flat black. Some places feel like they're receding, other places feel like they're coming forward into space. There's just a lot of layering happening in this painting that isn't immediately apparent. You know, it requires a bit of looking to figure out what's going on with these monkeys and other skeletal figures and geometric forms. So beautifully done to all of you honorable mention award winners. Moving into the named awards, the third place is this print, which I think is just an absolutely rich and delightful update on what at first glance appears to be a traditional Japanese style relief print. But all of the imagery, when you start digging at it, asserts itself as being really of this moment. Stop fracking, you know, that tells us right away that this is not from any other era. And again, here, you know, the sort of foreground, background blending into one another feels really interesting, that the sort of shortening of space between this bicycle tire and the stairs, all of these things are just really dynamic, a beautiful print. Second place award, Meredith Brown. I love about this work that the narrative is disrupted. You know, it's sort of reminiscent of a house structure, but the dipper is applying the honey to the honeycomb versus, you know, the sort of more expected. And our first place award winner. I just laughed at this work and found it to be so delightful and charming when I first encountered it. It's a wire form adaptation of the classical nude figure, the bust that is so frequently headless and armless and legless below the knees. But, you know, it's sort of playing with the form in that the thing we see first and foremost is the genitalia, no fig leaf present here, and it asserts itself ambiguously as male genitalia. It plays with the form in a way I found to be spunky and fun. And then finally, the Jurors Award, which, as Shannon allowed me to believe, is just a work that I held a particular love for. So this is a work that took a little bit of looking at to figure out what it was actually made of, but I responded to it first just formally. The color and the pattern that weren't readily decipherable jumped out at me before realizing that it was a dismembered soccer ball or some variety of ball. It's a taken apart ball, and the color that is found on it is largely on the back sides of the ball pieces, because we're looking at the interiors. And it's got sort of an arte povera feel to it that, that I just found really winning. So with that, I am going to jump out of my screen share and rejoin the rest of you and extend another huge congratulations to all of you artists who are in there. That was wonderful. And I would be happy to take any questions about anything.
Yeah, so I just want to start by saying thank you, thank you, thank you. It was fascinating to hear about your process and your work. It looks like we're losing a few of our participants, but if you have any questions for Julie about her work, please feel free to jump in and like I said, pop your questions into the chat, or feel free to raise your hand and unmute yourself. And I'll give you a minute. For those of you, for the award winners, if you just want to, again, send me an email if you are on campus or off campus, and we will mail you your prizes, which are gift certificates to the Gettysburg College bookstore. Can be used now, off campus, after graduation. They don't go bad. And again, just want to say congrats. So like I said, I was so bummed out when we had to postpone everything, cancel everything last year. And so I feel like it's this whole renewal, and I just feel so optimistic being able to see everyone's work in the gallery.
It does look beautiful there. Those of you who haven't made it over, but are still planning to, I encourage you to get in there. It's a sight for sore eyes to be able to see art in person again.
So if while we're waiting, maybe I wanted to ask you a question about, I know you had started the Gettysburg Work before I, had reached out about this jurying opportunity in Gettysburg. And I just wanted to know, again, like what prompted, the day trip to Gettysburg for you.
Yeah, that's an interesting question, and in trying to answer it, I'm thinking through like, how far back do I go? Backing this up, I had a long-running project that I did with Marie Antoinette. That was it was a performance-based work called Marie Antoinette in America, that started with a premise that Marie Antoinette had escaped the French Revolution and settled in the American West, and she wore this tumbleweed wig, and it was all of these sort of performative gestures. And in the sort of doing of this work, which interestingly started in Pennsylvania as well, this is just a little anecdotal tidbit you guys might be interested in. There is a place called French Asylum in like north of Wilkes-Barre, where a bunch of French loyalists were planning a home in exile for Marie Antoinette, thinking that she would be able to escape. So that the roadside marker in Pennsylvania is what started me on this entire project. But I became interested in, as I talked a little bit about in my talk, the sort of iconic history, so in other words, I started to look at Marie Antoinette's real history and realized that that wasn't what I was interested in so much as I was in what the popular imagination knows about Marie Antoinette, what anyone who's never studied it knows about her, and usually it's like, let them eat cake and some other vapid things. And those were what I sort of worked with for this particular work. And Gettysburg, the same kind of thing. It's not that I'm interested in the specifics of the battles there. I'm interested in what the word does, what we know about sort of the history of war and battle. And to someone who grew up in the Western US like I did, I'm ashamed to say, like, I get totally mixed up on what was Revolutionary War and what was Civil War because I didn't grow up around it. I can tell you all about the fur trappers, but But, you know, I mean, there's just this sort of like generic training and battle names. And I, you know, via this other history project and sort of performative things, I started going to battlefield sites and taking these photographs that were kind of thinking about what the land has witnessed, what the landscape has witnessed, and had this sort of like bare light bulb that was sort of interrogating the ground, you know, that had nothing there. So that was what started the Gettysburg day trips, I guess. The work obviously evolved from that point. You know, I took some images and they sat around for a little bit and I got them out and was interested and started thinking about other things in the way that we do as artists.
This is a question that popped up during your talk. Can anyone identify the monument that Julie showed in Toy Soldiers?
I know you all know where it is.
I'm not on campus as much as I usually am, and when I am, it's just like a beeline to the parking lot in Schmucker and then back. But is it, does anyone know if it's Meade or Reynolds? That's my guess.
He's directly opposite. So I come to Gettysburg from the south. And when you come up into town, it's right as you get to town, the cemetery is on the left and he's on the hill real big right there. And there's like a donut house or something that you park in the parking lot to.
I think we lost Shannon Zeltman. I think she would have known.
Okay.
Well, I know it's a Friday afternoon and it's a long week, the end of a long week at the end of a long semester. So I'm going to stop the recording right here.